the Fidelity scales. So at that conceptual level, it sounds very, very easy. When you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, as you'll see, there's a lot of, the scale has 25 items. There's a lot of nuance to all of the items. We'll talk all about it. I encourage you to ask questions. If you see something we talk about and it just doesn't make any sense, or you're just trying to struggle to understand what it is or why it is, those are the things we want you to ask. This is a safe space for all kinds of questions like that. Nobody here is working under the impression that you know everything there is to know about Fidelity Review or becoming a Fidelity Reviewer. So again, please ask questions. So a couple things. I've been working with Darren and Dawn for probably 5 years or so to try to get IPS, raise its profile in the state of Washington. And we've got this slide deck, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, but I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat website. I really want you all to try to have up in the background while we're talking, because I'm actually going to be showing a lot of this website to you. So if you go to www.ipsworks.org, you will find this website right here, which is the IPS Employment Center. These are the people who, they're a think tank. They created IPS. They did all the research on IPS. And they've got this sort of central clearing house of all there is to know about IPS and Fidelity reviewing. What I also want you to think about too is navigate on the top menu here over to the document library. And when that loads, already kind of scrolling while you're all, hopefully you can see my screen too. And if you can't, let me know. These are all documents you can look at and download for absolutely free. And it is robust. There's like 8 or 9 pages of things in different languages. We're going to want to go to page 3, and we're going to open 2 things. We're going to open the Fidelity manual. What I do is I right click, I open it in a new tab, and then we're going to go to the Fidelity scale. And those will help us as we go through our conversation today and Wednesday. But let's see here. First, I'm going to make active a poll. This is a way for us to interact with each other. You don't have to worry about coming off of mute or anything like this. Well, I got the wrong one activated. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're breaking up a little.
Am I?
You are.
I feel like this happens every time I talk with you guys, and maybe it's not personal. I hope you don't think that.
I promise we're not jinxing you. There's no voodoo doll.
There's no hacks going on. Yeah, I'm not sure. I've been on video stuff all day today so far, and knock on wood, everything seemed to be going fine. I guess I probably jinxed it myself there. So I opened up and made active a poll, and so you can either text to join this poll, or you can go online to Poll Everywhere and join this poll. But the first question is just good to kind of see this word cloud start to populate, and try to keep your answers to 1 or 2 words. I'm just curious, from this group, what was your first job? And while people are kind of getting access to the poll and opening these, the manual and the scale, I will just tell everybody that my father was self-employed. So technically my first job was working for my father. He probably violated all of the child labor laws that you could ever write. But my first job where I wasn't working for my father was actually in the mall. I worked at Wilson's, where I was a leather expert. That was my actual job title, leather expert. Which I don't know. I don't even know if Wilson's are still around or still exist. So I see movie theater. That always seems like such a fun job. There's probably things about it that aren't fun, but All right, dry cleaners, grocery store, like a courtesy clerk. Yep. Lifeguard. I feel like there's a lifeguard in every group too. I don't know if Dawn and Darren, if you guys have noticed that. You're very safe out there in Washington. And we'll wait a little bit for some more to pop in there. Um, well, thank you, Darren, for putting the link in there. Oh, they keep moving. When I go to Onion Picker, I think goes together. Someone's first job was a musician. It's awesome. I would try to be a musician too. It doesn't pay very well. Childcare circus. This is great. Prep cook, pool
That's
cleaner.
why it wasn't a childcare circus. It was probably.
I don't know. I've met some kids where it could be a circus.
Yeah, I agree with Paul. I think I have to.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, these are great. These are really, really awesome.
I
I'll
see
leave-
the
go ahead.
chat that we had self-employed prep cook was first job after that. Parents also, the self-employed parents also, and then prep cook after that. And pool cleaner. That's an interesting one.
It is. It is. I don't know if that would be a good job or a bad job. Probably a little bit of both, right? Depends on the day. So why do we ask what's your first job? It's one of the first questions we ask anybody we meet, isn't it? What do you do for a living? Where do you work? And it's really just to underscore the value that we all place on our jobs. And I don't have to convince you guys. You're all believers. You're here to learn about IPS and supported employment. So I know you guys believe in the power of work, but it's just a way to underscore it. And often with my own employment teams, this is the kind of question where you just kind of get everybody back to basics. If you're really struggling with something, job development or whatever, just talking about why are we here? Why do we work? What is the point for us so that we can better help the people we serve? So thank you for going down the little path with me. I'm going to flip back over to our slide deck. So the welcome and introductions, I don't think we've changed this really since, maybe we did change it since the pandemic, but again, the more you interact, the better this will be for you. I certainly don't want to just sit and talk for 100 hours to you. And I'm guessing you don't want that either. And poor Dawn and Darren, they've heard me do this thing probably 15 times. So they really don't want me to be talking for the whole time either. But we're going to put our heads together. We're going to have fun. What's great about IPS is this continuous quality improvement. I talked a little bit earlier about how, if you have the Fidelity scale, you need somebody to do the Fidelity reviews. And that helps you understand where you're at and how to get better. And that's really exactly how continuous quality improvement works. We've got the defined Fidelity scale and items within it. We've got how it's measured. So the reviewers come in to analyze the work so that as an organization, an IPS agency, you can improve what you're doing and have a better control over your outcomes. It is a cycle. It is definitively a cycle. And it's not like an audit or a survey like by a joint commission or CARF or anything like that. I think you'll hear as we talk today and Wednesday, it's different in a good way. We're really collaborative. We're not looking to do any gotchas or anything like that. And we understand, I think, as reviewers, that agencies have to make Fidelity work for them. And I don't mean change the rules as much as I mean there might be an organization you go do a Fidelity review at, and they may have decided they don't want to do this one part, and so you can't give them, like the lowest point you can give is a 1. And the agency is okay with it. They've had to make that organizational decision. There's an awful lot of opportunities with IPS as well for learning collaboration. The whole model is really based on a collaborative approach to helping people find employment. Dawn and Darren have oodles of opportunities for you to get additional training, phone calls for you to talk with your peers across the state to really learn and understand not just how IPS is being implemented within your own walls, but across the state, different ways with different populations, in ways that you haven't thought of. So I will say, unlike other things, I work at a mental health center when I'm not doing this, and unlike other practices or strategies, IPS is absolutely collaborative agency to agency, even when agencies are working in the same location and may be viewed as competitors for each other, as agencies. Often the IPS teams are some of the most collaborative between the two agencies because at the end of the day, they're there to work, they're helping the client get a job, and that's more important to them than holding on to a case instead of referring it to, a stakeholder in the community. So very, very, very cool to be a part of the IPS community, in my opinion. You'll see when we talk to, when we get into the Fidelity manual specifically, you'll see how the manual really talks about IPS and serving adults with mental illness. And it's good just to kind of think about, so that they wrote that, 20 years ago. And the research that's been done since then shows that IPS works with a variety of different populations. So if you're sitting in an organization as an IPS provider and you don't serve adults with serious mental illness, that's okay. The guidance is pretty clear that really what we want to do is just sort of help agencies figure out who their treatment team is and their population of focus, and then that really helps us understand from the lens of Fidelity, who the service team really is that supports that population. So just kind of putting things out there. So if, for example, you're in an agency that works with people with traumatic brain injuries, and people don't have to have a mental illness, for example, to receive your services, we would want to talk to you as Fidelity reviewers about who's the treatment team for the adults you serve with traumatic brain injury, to help us as reviewers understand, who do we consider some of these other entities in a Fidelity review that we'll want to talk with or interview. Hopefully that makes sense. We'll see some examples of it going forward here. When we get into the Fidelity scale, you'll see it's really split up into three sections here. So the first is staffing, and that section talks exactly like you think, all about the employment specialists and their caseloads and what they do and how they do it. There's an organization section, which is really the reviewers trying to understand how the IPS team is integrated into the treatment team. And then there's services, which are exactly, again, what it sounds like. Specifically, what services is the IPS team providing, and how does that stack up against the Fidelity scale? So there's this scoring table here for Fidelity, and it's got all 25 items. It's got them separated into our three categories. And you see, it's some of them are very simple. Caseload size, right? That's easy to understand. Is how big is someone's caseload? Vocational unit. Other things take a little bit more interpretation. Zero exclusion criteria, for example, et cetera, et cetera. And what happens is when you're doing a Fidelity review, each of these items gets scored based on what you hear or see. Gets scored for a point value anywhere from 1 to 5. So each of these items will be scored 1 to 5. When you add them all up, you get a total cumulative score, which is really your Fidelity score. And it shakes out into this gradient here where 73 or below is not considered a score that has fidelity to this model. It means you aren't doing the things that would get you fidelity to the IPS scale. Doesn't mean you're doing bad work. It just means, for whatever reasons, conditions exist that we can't quite say you have alignment with the Fidelity scale. However, 74 to 99, 100 to 114, 115 to 125, all of those scores count as Fidelity in that gradient there. And I really like to make sure people hear me say, Fidelity has a flexibility to it. So you have fidelity to the model, whether you're scoring a 74 or whether you're scoring a 125. All of the rest of it is sort of nuance and details. So you could be an agency or be scoring an agency this week that gets 120. And then next year when you get there, they may have had appreciable turnover and a lot of changes in the organization. Their fidelity score might go down to 92. It's not good or bad. There are things that happened that impacted their score. So again, we've got this I don't know the right word for it. It's probably an illness in Western society where we see the highest point value and we think we're going to go for that, and that's perfect. Um, but I would tell you, I've seen more agencies. I've only seen one agency get a 124. I've never seen somebody get perfect, just because life happens and staffing happens and things like that. Um, so I always tell agencies, I don't think the goal of IPS Fidelity is perfection. Um, and it's hard to do. First of all, it's hard to maintain. But also the way the fidelity reviews work, it's a kind of a snapshot. So you heard Dawn talk about last week. She did a fidelity review. She was there 2 days. Even at 2 full days, it's literally impossible to see everything you would need to see, talk to everybody you would need to talk to exhaustively give a definitive score. You're literally getting a snapshot of information within a 2-day period and trying to synthesize all that data, um, to arrive at the most fair score you can as a reviewer. So not to say it's a flawed process or anything like that, but it's a lot to do this once annually. It would be even more to do it twice annually. And we'll talk, I'm sure, before we're done talking, about some of the challenges that exist for the state of Washington with regards to the number of fidelity reviewers. Um, but again, if you're sitting there right now and you're at an IPS agency and you've had a fidelity review and you're thinking about your score, I encourage you to not think about it being good or bad or whatever. Your score is just your score. And typically what happens is as soon as the reviewers leave, agencies put things in place where the score changes as a result of that. I encourage you to just kind of sit back and understand now that you'll be sitting on the other side of the table, potentially as a fidelity reviewer. One of the jobs, in addition to providing a fair fidelity score and process, one of our jobs too is to help agencies understand some of this. That don't beat yourself up, and you're still doing good work if you score a 74. Um, you're still doing good work if you score a 73. We're talking about fidelity to the model, not good or bad work. The research really shows that agencies with higher fidelity to the model tend to have better outcomes. None of the research says it is or isn't good work based on their score. So I just want to stop there and see if Darren or Dawn have anything they wanted to add. I know we try to talk about this a lot when we're talking with this group, about how the fidelity scale provides flexibility.
And I appreciate the fact that you do that, Paul, because we have so many agencies with whom we work that are not behavioral health agencies. And so those pieces of integration with mental health treatment team end up being harder to do. And your point of whatever is the support team kind of a thing and collaborating with whoever that might be is important. But some of it still is so linked to behavioral health stuff that some of the agencies don't have access to, that I think they worry about getting lower scores in those areas. My feeling has always been, if you're doing your best to try and connect with those behavioral health agencies that are providing services to the people on your caseload, then that's what we would hope for. So sometimes best effort is just is the best you're going to do, and it's something we appreciate.
Yep.
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to add is that this process takes time. Really focus on what you're doing well and see how they match up with all the different principles of fidelity, because a lot of agencies are doing a lot of things really well. And this is to enhance things, to standardize some of the practices, as Paul said, look at the quality assurance process, but just to know that it takes time to implement some of these, as it can be a very technical implementation within a supportive employment program.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing I'll say is that, as a reviewer, one of the neat things I think to see, among other things, is when an agency sort of embraces the fidelity scale, even if they're in an agency that doesn't fit right in the square hole, for example, with a mental health team, for example, they've got other teams that support their work. Talking to an organization that says, this is who we're considering our treatment team, and sort of them interpreting the fidelity scale is really neat to talk with agencies about, because even though this is a Fidelity scale that all IPS providers follow, it is not a one size fits all. I mean, everybody really sort of implements IPS Fidelity in different ways. Now, there are certain things that are the same, sure. But boy, it is really neat sometimes. It's part of the fun for me as a reviewer. You go to an agency and see, well, golly, that is such a unique way to get that Fidelity item satisfied. What they've implemented here. It's just such a neat thing. So I encourage you as a reviewer to be open-minded too. It doesn't, while there is a prescription of sorts with Fidelity, at the end of the day, we're not there to, like I said, do gotchas or get anybody, in hot water or whatever. We have very limited power actually as Fidelity reviewers. But I'm always open to interpretation of things like this. Because at the end of the day, what matters are the outcomes, right? So we're not there. Agencies don't really have to listen to us. So we can come in and say, we think you should hire another employment specialist. And they can say, well, we don't have the money to do it. See you next year. That's what I mean when I say we have limited power. We're there to come in and make recommendations, highlight strengths. I don't want to forget to say that because every agency you go to has some awesome strengths for sure.
I know, Paul, you talked about all, there's differences and commonalities, and I think the biggest commonality amongst all of us is that we want people to be employed.
Yeah.
Bottom line. And so
Yeah.
I haven't been to an agency that was anything other than caring about the people that they serve and really having that desire to help people be successfully employed.
Yeah. Good people doing good work, right?
You betcha.
I pulled up for this group the Supported Employment Fidelity Review Manual that I encourage you to kind of navigate to. And just as a refresher, if you go to the IPS Works website and then you click on Library, click Document Library, then page 3 of the document library, you can view it. This is really, I mean, if we were in person, I would show you my Fidelity Review Manual. Darren and Dawn have seen it. It's dog-eared. It's got sticky notes all over it. The text is highlighted. I've got little notes to myself in the margin. You don't have to have it on paper. I'm a dinosaur. I like things on paper. There's something about how I synthesize information where I write a note and therefore I remember it. So I encourage you to have a copy, whether it be digital or whatever. As you go down this path to become a Supported Employment Fidelity Reviewer, this book has got everything you could ever want to see. So for example, and we'll talk on Wednesday, for example, about the process. Today we're going to talk more about the contents of the Fidelity Review. So Wednesday when we talk, we'll talk about how do you get an agency, if you're the lead reviewer, how do you get an agency sort of to even talk with you about a Fidelity Review and that sort of thing. How does the agency know what to get prepared? This book has it all lined out for you. It's easy peasy, right? It tells you what you measure, what's rated, who does the ratings. If you're an agency and you're preparing for a Fidelity Review, you can use the same book to do that. Gives you notes on how to actually conduct when you're there for 2 days, how to conduct the Fidelity visit, how to score items, and so on and so forth. And where we'll start, and these are all links. So when you click Supported Employment Fidelity items, for example, it'll take you right to that section of the document. And so I thought we would just kind of spend a little bit of time cruising through some of these items in the manual and having a discussion about some of them. I also want to point out the Fidelity scale, which is just below the Fidelity manual in the document library. This is a sort of almost like, to me, a visual representation of each of the items we'll go through in the manual and how to score them. And I just like to show this to people because there are some that are very, very easy. They aren't tricky. Caseload size, for example, I'll try to make this a little larger for you. For good Fidelity, employment specialists have individual caseloads and the maximum number is 20 on their caseload. So what we will kind of go through the manual in a second here, but really for a score of 5, each employment specialist has to have 20 or fewer clients on their caseload. Can't get much easier than that. In the middle column here is a data source column. This tells you where you can get it. You can get it in interviews, documentation, and I always forget what MIS is. I'm going to scroll at the end. Close your eyes while I'm scrolling, sorry. Management information, so that would be like a medical record, for example. So at its core, it is that easy that for any one item on the Fidelity review, you talk with people, you review their documentation, and wherever they fall is the point they get, the point that you award, if that makes sense. Now, I will point out for caseload size, for example, the manual is great. It gives you the possible sources of information, where you might find it. It gives you a rationale for each item. It gives you a great big narrative, all the different ways it could look. And then it's got, if we were a person, I would have markers for all of you, or highlighters, and say, highlight this sentence right here. If the IPS specialist does not have a discrete caseload list and doesn't meet with some clients regularly and does not complete documentation for people on his caseload, a rating of 3 or less is indicated. So throughout this manual, and I'll point them out as we go through them, you will find sentences like this where they say, if this is the case, they can't score higher than a 4, or they can't score higher than a 3. Those are the things that are good for you to have. Again, sticky note, highlighter, whatever works for your brain, for to make that stand out. But at the end of the day, if you have two employment specialists, you're really averaging their caseloads together to find out what the correct score is. So in this first example, you've got 3 employment specialists, 25, 19, and 20 on their caseloads. When you do all the math of that, the average is 21 people per employment specialist, and so you would assign them a score of a 4 for this one based on what you see, because the average is 21. They've score of a 4. And what's great about the way they've set up the Fidelity scale and Fidelity manual is when an agency wants to ask you further questions about a score, I mean, sometimes the math is the math. Yeah, we understand that, there's somebody with 19 and so on and so forth, and that the other person only has 25 because they're covering for, Jane until she's, fully oriented or whatever. I get all of that, but at the end of the day, that we have to score it the way that we're supposed to score it.
Question for you, Paul.
Yes, please.
So a lot of the agencies to get started have had staff that did half supported employment and half, or theoretically, half supported employment, half supported housing. So then, first of all, that means that their supported employment staff is part-time, not full-time.
Right.
But how do you calculate caseload wise that way? Do you count in the housing caseload too if it's a separate one? What would you say we would do?
I'd probably spend about a half day asking questions just to make sure I understood how they have it set up is really the short answer. But you're right, at the end of the day, they are not full-time employment specialists. So this is where you start to get into a situation where the manual might not provide the exact example of what you're looking at. And so you have to try to figure out, how do I assign the score that's the most fair score? So the actual item is that people have individual caseloads, and that the maximum caseload for any full-time employment specialist is 20 or fewer. So if they were straight half-time, like exactly half-time, you could infer that their maximum caseload should be 10 or fewer, right? Now, it doesn't say that anywhere in the rule. Like that's where it gets tricky. And so then you'd have to ask more questions about exactly how it's set up, how it's oriented. Yeah, I'm just scrolling ahead a little bit. No examples here. So
Yeah.
I guess what I would say is a couple things. If you had employment specialists that were half IPS and half housing, this is where it gets kind of interesting in IPS, because I don't know that caseload size is necessarily where we would see a score materialize. I mean, at some point, if they're half time and their caseload's probably not greater than 20 anyway, so you might have to figure out how many total full-time people they have. So if they have 2 half-time people, that's 1 full-time person, equals, right? So you'd have to be artful. on this one, I don't know how I'd score it. I'd have to ask a lot of questions, but I think the next item is exactly something that we would have a discussion with them about. Employment services staff. Employment specialists provide only employment services.
Right.
So we know, based on this example, that's not true, because half the time they're doing housing. So if it's a true 50%, we would have to score this one a 1. And there's other places in the manual I can think of where this would also crop up and affect the score. And it's good for the group here to kind of understand too that sometimes each item is really in a vacuum. You know, you're evaluating caseload size in that item. There's these other things that are happening that may or may not impact caseload size, but we got to push it out of our brain while we're scoring caseload size.
Right.
In this example, you might have to really understand, how do I regard this? And I think, to me, like, really their functions, you know, with housing. If somebody has a housing disruption, that's an emergency, that's a crisis.
Yep.
So I know they probably wouldn't have the ability to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I only work on housing on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Can you come back then?" They'd probably help the person with housing immediately, of course. So then it comes down to, okay, well, how does that actually play out from a function perspective for somebody who's trying to split time? Because it's impossible to really split time, in my opinion, because the emergencies always crop up, and
Absolutely.
you know, you have to respond to those. It's the same with agencies that want to have like half of a case manager and half of an employment specialist.
Mhm.
You know,
We struggled so much with both of these, as a matter of fact, because so many agencies have half and half at least to get started, and we hope it's only to get started. We hope that at some point in
Sure.
time we have full-time staff for both. But I think I'm going to staff this one with the IPS folks the next time we have a phone call with them, just because I'll speak for myself. I struggle with this and trying to score it every single review where you have that mixed staff kind of thing going on.
yeah, and you know, as a tip, I would bring a couple specific examples to the table. It's hard to deal in hypotheticals, so I would say, okay, that, you know, agency has 3. Whatever the last thing you saw was that stumped you. The agency has 2 employment specialists. Each of them work 0.5 or half time IPS, and their other function is housing. And I would ask things like, how do I regard caseload size? How do I regard, you know, specific items,
Mhm.
to try to see if you can get some clarity. It is tough to arrive at a score with examples, because what you don't have when you're like talking with the IPS team is the benefit of 2 full days talking with the team there about every little thing, you know.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's a good idea, and you could probably get, I mean, at least closer to clarity with that IPS team.
Hoping so. And
Yeah,
this is like one of the things I find interesting about Fidelity is it's not entirely cut and dried. So then you have this philosophical conversation about, so what's the bottom line here? What's the intent, and how does that fit here? And so I think those kinds of things are really interesting. I can
yep.
sadly get lost in those things a
I
little.
can too. No, I can too, and I think it's important for this group to hear too. I think first and foremost, as a reviewer, from a like where do you center yourself in a discussion like this? Um, is how do you award the most points in the most fair way? You know, like, you don't want to just be like, oh well, they're half time and their caseloads are 10, so therefore they're less than 20. That's kind of the really shorthand version of trying to score caseload size for that example. You really want to understand. I mean, the purpose of caseload size being 20 or fewer, if you go back to the rationale, is that large caseloads, you know, difficulty maintaining regular contact and meeting other fidelity standards. Um, so you want them to have a caseload size that's appropriately manageable, like 20 is for a full timer. And so again, you might end up by the numbers saying, well, they've got 10 and it worked, like it makes sense to give them a 5 here, but there might really be an impact, a bigger impact elsewhere, in the fidelity scale. Um, how to compartmentalize things in the fidelity scale. Um, so here, like on the next item, employment services staff, employment specialists provide only employment services. I mean, right out of the gate for rationale, it says practitioners who have dual roles often focus on emergencies, housing crisis, and don't have time to connect with employers or develop other skills. So this one in your example, Dawn, would probably have more of an impact. And it gives some, let's see here. I think the examples are always the best thing to read. So in the first one, there's 3 IPS specialists. One full-time spends 1 day each week working in day treatment. The other 2 only provide employment. And it's good for this group too to remember that part of IPS Fidelity is also supported education too. That's why you'll see education listed in the Fidelity manual. So 80% for that first specialist, and the other 2 are 100. And just like the item we talked about previously, you're averaging it together. So 93% of this team is focused on IPS. And again, if you go over to our Fidelity scale, it's a 4 because the range is 90 to 95% of the time they're focusing on employment services. So let me stop right there and just see if folks have questions or are scratching their head about scoring in general. And again, you'll hear Dawn and Darren and I talk a lot about in examples or use the examples from the manual. So I encourage you to think about how your own team is set up if you're kind of struggling to understand how we're scoring an item. And if you want to click your mic on or put it in the chat, I mean, those are great examples to talk about things that are real to you. So let me stop right here and just kind of see if folks have questions about what we've said so far or where we've gone with this so far. And Dawn and Darren, I don't even know, are people able to unmute and talk, or do we need to grant that permission?
Let's see here. I think they're able to unmute. Laura or Ruby, would you give it a shot and tell me if it works?
Hello, hello, testing.
It worked.
It's
Thank you, Laura.
working. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've got another poll up here. If folks want to chime in on the poll, I'm just wondering what stands out to folks about the list of items reviewed during a Fidelity visit. We had that up on the screen earlier. And I can pull it up again if you'd like. All right, we already have somebody in the chat that says it makes sense to them. Good so far.
And I'm just curious if there's anybody else like me that likes to have those philosophical conversations about what are agencies doing, what is, how does it work, and how does this dovetail together, and just what's the bottom line. I think it's fascinating to do that stuff, which is why part of the reason why I kind of like Fidelity reviews and hearing the wonderful things that people are doing. That's just,
Yeah, definitely.
we all need the whole hope, success story, that kind of thing. And I find I get that in Fidelity reviews too.
All right, we got somebody that said it's a fair system. It is a pretty comprehensive look. And again, it's you couldn't know everything after 2 days of talking and looking, but you know enough. Clear and straightforward expectations, yeah, definitely, right? Definitely. We'll wait for one more, and then we'll move to the next poll item. All right, I'm going to move to the next one anyway. So I'm just kind of curious to get this group into kind of thinking about being a Fidelity reviewer mode. I'm just kind of curious from this group, what what are things you would ask employment specialists or, IPS team leaders to try to find out and be able to score, their focus on employment? If you look at we want to know, do they only provide employment services, and if they don't, how much of the time is on this other stuff? So I'm just kind of curious what the group is thinking. Does your average day and week look like? Yep, that's a good question. Do you provide services other than SE? Can I see your calendar? Yes, these are all wonderful, wonderful things. See, you guys are already thinking like reviewers. It's really just asking questions. And teams are invested and committed to making sure you have what you need because they want to get the most fair score too. So I always like to think of it as us and the IPS team working together to get the fairest score. Because really, if they don't provide you anything, you can't score anything. Is the reality. Good, good, good. Let me stop for a minute and just kind of suggest that maybe we take a 10-minute break. I know it's the first hour and everything, but I want to make sure people have the ability to to get a break. And then what we'll do is we'll come back at I don't know. Do you think 9 or 10 minutes is okay? Come back on the hour, and we'll kind of just keep having discussions like this about the Fidelity Manual, Fidelity Scale, and we'll get together with all of our questions as we continue the day. Does that sound good?
Wonderful.
Okay, I'm gonna pause my sharing and mute. I'm gonna get some more water, and I will see you all in about 9 minutes. Be right back.
How's everybody doing? Since getting at some of the stuff that you hoped to hear. You know, we're only an hour into it, but just curious.
All right, and as people are kind of getting ready and coming back in, Dawn and Darren, just a heads up, there's a question in the chat that came just to me, but um, I'm gonna try to have this question go out to the whole group. I think it's a Washington specific question that I'd like you guys to chime in on if that's all right.
Okay.
So I'm gonna try to copy it into the chat for everybody. All right, so I put it in there to everybody to protect the identity of the questioner. Just a joke.
Hmm.
So you've got a few minutes before everybody comes back. I think that we can maybe
Yeah.
start with that. It's a
Well,
good question.
I'm looking at, so over the years, I worked in the DDA supported employment realm and the mental health supported employment realm. And I know there's definitely some differences, but if the person's willing to send the question to all of us, I'd be curious, or unmute, I'd be curious to have them elaborate just a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, I
Uh,
offered that too. I just I know I also told everybody to take a break, so I don't know if they stepped away.
Yeah. Well, we're at 10 o'clock, so probably they're filtering back at this point in time.
Yeah.
And granted, when I worked within the DDA supported employment realm, it was a bunch of years ago, in a program called Community Access and Supported Employment. I worked for S. Health Start and Associates, and when they had an office in the Moses Lake area, and we did community access and supported employment, there was a lot of focus on volunteering and joining clubs and things along that line, and then some on work as well. But it really was more of a focus on kind of community integration types of things, and I know that's changed to more of a supported employment focus. I think one of the biggest differences between working with folks in the kind of the DDA realm as opposed to the mental health realm is that in kind of the world of working with folks that are being served by DDA, there are potentially more of them that need long-term supports than perhaps in the mental health world. When we're talking, or behavioral health, I should say, sorry. When we're talking behavioral health, we're talking about folks that have just a huge wide range of skills, abilities, and challenges. And there certainly are a number of them that will need kind of more the long-term support. But I think that working with people through DDA, there ends up being more of them that perhaps need the long-term support. I'm not sure if that's starting to get at the question that was asked, but that's one of the differences. Within foundational community supports and the way that they've done the extensions and the exceptions, it is possible for a person to receive long-term support. I know that was early on was a concern, but when we attend the FCS Q&A and they show the data, there are actually individuals that have been on FCS with extensions and exceptions since program inception. So they've been on continuously since the program started, which means they're getting that long-term support.
Yeah, and I will say, not a Washington specific remark, but just from sort of my neck of the woods, I mean, frankly, there are some gray areas where, um, there are people that exist sort of in that shaded area of the Venn diagram, right? And often funding doesn't work that way.
Mhm.
So I think there are providers probably across the United States, and I would guess all over the world, that this subpopulation that exists, is sort of has a foot in one funding system, usually in a state, and has a funding system in another, or one foot in another funding system. And sometimes the funding systems don't allow for each of them to be activated at the same time. And so
Correct.
um,
Yeah. Can't double
yeah,
dip.
you can't double dip. And at the end of the day, I think all of us want to find the best service provider, whatever that looks like.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it just gets really challenging.
Mhm.
And I know of places in the United States where um, the the mental health system is kind of like, yeah, please come schedule an appointment with us. And not all healthcare systems are like that. There's waiting lists for others. And in my area, there's a waiting list for like the DDA world. Or at least there has been historically. And it can be a real challenge if you're someone who needs help now, to be able to hear that you have to wait 3 years to get that help.
Mm.
So at some point, then it's like, well, is there something we can do in the mental health world that gets close, but maybe not 100% of what they need? I don't
Right.
know. It's too bad. These are system issues, I think, that we're talking about here.
They are. Well, and I will mention, you said, waiting list. DVR has that order of selection waiting list, although they've pulled more folks from it now. They have 3 main categories, 7 total categories, and I think they've got open through category 4, might be 5. It wasn't really clear in the last meeting I attended whether it was 4 or 5 that they've opened up. But what some DVR counselors, VRCs, voc rehab counselors, have done is, when someone's on that order of selection waiting list, they've been referring to FCS agencies so that they can get more immediate supported employment assistance. I
Sure.
will say too, when we talk about gray areas, it's interesting to me that when we talk to DVR counselors about supported employment, our definitions differ. For FCS, if we're talking about supported employment, excuse me, we're talking about the people that qualify, and they have a number of challenges, but it is not always long-term support that's needed. In the DVR world, when they're talking true supported employment, it's that individual that needs more long-term support. And so if someone's having a conversation with a voc rehab counselor and talking about supported employment, what's automatically going to pop in their head is that person that has the most severe challenges and the one that's going to need the long-term support, as opposed to could be someone with far less in the way of challenges that isn't going to need long-term support.
Right. Anything else on this question, either from the person that asked it or from you, Dawn, or Darren? This is a kind of a big topic.
It is. And lots of little subtopics underneath. So
Right.
I'm glad the question was asked.
Yeah, those are good questions to ask, because they're real problems. They're real things that happen. I always think of the agencies that are represented here. I mean, you're working with real people with real problems, and
Mhm.
this is a good thing to call out. It doesn't mean we have a nice, pretty answer that's all wrapped up for you, unfortunately.
That's as obvious by our
Yeah.
responses. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, on some level, yes, you asked a question, we all basically said, yeah, you're right.
Oh dear.
But it is good to talk about it in this forum. And then certainly, I think stuff like this, where there's systematic or system level nuances that impact the care, I think then it comes down to individual discussion with this client and their support system and that sort
Mhm.
of thing. There's really not, until there's a better solution. That's the only one I could think of.
Absolutely. And always, I know Darren and I always say in these in various trainings, if you have a question and you want us to elaborate more, also feel free to reach out between, trainings. I can put our email addresses in the chat box, and we welcome, being able to have the conversations.
Well, let's head back to our content here. So we stopped. We were talking about the first two items: caseload size and employment services staff. And when you move into the next item, it's vocational generalists. And so that might seem like a strange phrase, but it basically is an item that evaluates whether each employment specialist does all of the phases of the employment service. And they define that as intake, engagement, assessment, job placement, job coaching, and follow-along supports before stepping down to less intensive employment. A note here, one of the hallmarks of IPS is the ability to get benefits planning. And so they're not requiring that people get benefits planning here, or that the agency provides benefits counseling. That's viewed as sort of, it's a different item. That's the best way to put it. And it's number one in services. So long story short, you'll see some items like this on the Fidelity scale, where basically score of 5 is almost exactly what the definition is. And then it's really good. This is a great item for you to kind of be alert to how subtle changes in the language for a score of 1, 2, 3, or 4 can be. So you got score of 5, which is all 6 phases. Specialists providing 5 phases, but not the entire whole continuum of services. And then it goes from 1 to 4 phases for a score of 3. And then this is really where it just starts to get sort of, it's different enough. So the employment specialist has a caseload, but they refer to other programs for vocational services. Now I'll tell you, I've never seen that. I don't know how that would look to have an employment specialist that refers to other programs. But anyway, and then a 1 where the employment specialist only provides vocational referral services to vendors and other programs. So just a good idea for you to kind of tune into the gradient between each of these anchors here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you'll see later in the manual, sometimes the manual will say things like a score of 5 is, all of something. A score of 4 is most. A score of 3 is some. So it is really good as you become more familiar with this to just tune in to the specific language they're using in each of these anchors. Here's what I wanted to ask you all. Another poll, you just saw it too. Make sure I get to the right section. Scroll the wrong direction. Sorry. If you get down to vocational generalist in the manual, it's just like before. It gives you the rationale, kind of gives you some background, et cetera, et cetera. It gives you examples. Again, just like we're thinking. What I was going to do is just walk you through the examples. An IPS supervisor is responsible for meeting everybody referred to the program before assigning each person to an IPS employment specialist. In this case, the score is not higher than 4 because the IPS employment specialist is not engaging people directly from the referral. So that is one of the phases of employment: intake, engaging people directly from the referral. So that example is saying you give them a 4 because they're only providing 5 phases of employment service. So just to kind of walk you through some of these scoring examples. So then another example is one person on the team is a lead job developer. That person is really markets the program. So if this is true, if the reviewers believe the marketer is really augmenting the employment specialist effort, they could score a 5. And then this is what I like about the examples. It says, however, reviewers also listen to whether the marketer is providing client-specific job development or if they're simply focused on job openings. And it is probably difficult, like they're saying, to do anything really individualized for people that they don't work with. So depending on how their answer comes out or how they quantify some of this to you as a reviewer, they may have a 5, they may have a different score for this item. The next one, the IPS specialist carries out all 6 phases of employment services. So that's a 5, right? A second IPS specialist provides 4 phases. So intake, engagement, assessment, and follow-on. So we know if they provide 4 services, that a score of 3 would be appropriate because they provide 1 to 4 phases. A third IPS specialist provides only job development, which is, again, a 3. 1 to 4 is the range for a score of 3. And so what they suggest here then is you calculate and do another average with at least 1 decimal point. And so what you do is you do the average. They have a score of 3.6. And this is the part that I think is interesting. The score is 3 because the calculated value for rating is rounded down. And so I'm just kind of wondering from this group, why do you think everywhere else in our life, once it hits 0.5, we round up to the next whole number, right? So I'm wondering from this group, why do you think the manual has us rounding down here? And it has it in other places in the Fidelity scale as well. Spoiler alert, as they say. So we have a brave soul who said they don't know. And that's okay if you don't know. That's why you're here, right?
Well, and I'm going to say that I don't know either.
You haven't reached the next number yet is an answer. I want to go to the scale, sorry. Yeah, so when if you have 3 employment specialists and 1 is a 5, 1 is a 3, and 1 is a 3, like that example just says, what you have to do is, yes, you average them, but you don't round up because rounding, they ended up getting a 3.6, right, when you do the numerical average. So if you round it up to a 4, what you're saying is the employment specialists provide 5 phases of employment service. But one employment specialist provides 1 and the other one provides 4. So that score that you rounded up to of 4 wouldn't really accurately reflect what's going on with the team. So you basically are rounding down in most cases with these averages because you're wanting to give them the highest point that reflects the work that they've done. So they haven't yet done the work to get the score of a 4 that only 1 staff member has. So the rounding down to a 3 provides a more realistic and accurate score for the work they're doing on this particular item. Does that make sense to folks? I hope it makes sense to folks. It's different. And again, it's 180 degrees opposite from everything we've all been trained mathematically, right? It's and you'll see this appear in a couple different places in the Fidelity scale. We just want to make sure the score we give them reflects the work that's actually being done. So that's why we don't round up.
So I ended up seeing a direct message to me, Paul, that said that one of the participants is not seeing the polls. They're not popping up for them. And I wanted to point folks to the fact that, see where it says respond at poll ev. You have to be logged into the Poll Everywhere site to be able to respond to the poll. I'm not sure popping up wise. Paul, is this just in your regular slide deck, or is this is outside the slide deck, isn't it?
It's outside the slide. Yeah, when I put it in the slide deck, there are more problems with people seeing it. So this is what I've defaulted to. I'm going to type it in the chat as well, and you can join on the web, or you can text the longest thing ever to and so the way this usually works for me is Like if I text Paul, Paul Ferris 618 to the number 22333, I'll get a response text that says you have joined such and such chat. Oh, sorry, Jacqueline. I sent all of these things only to one person. My bad. So let me resend those. So there is one. And here's the other one. So yeah, like when I text it to join, I get a response text that says, welcome to Paul Ferris's poll or whatever. Oh goodness, blue screen of death. Sorry about that. Okay, let's carry on there. This is a good discussion about vocational generalists. Moving into the next section now, we're going to look at the organization, how it's structured, how it's set up. First item is integration of the rehabilitation, which is what how this manual describes the supported employment team with the mental health treatment team through assignment. So a couple things here. One, remember, we're not really concerned about whether it's a mental health team or not. We're running it to be a relevant treatment team. I think it is a good sort of way to think about it. And each agency is a little bit different. And so you really have to have them help you understand as a reviewer. Employment specialists are part of up to 2 mental health treatment teams from which at least 90% of the employment specialist's caseload is comprised. So again, a couple things to unpack there. In general, again, this is another one where a score of 5 is they just reiterate the definition. And then the rest end up being kind of percentages. So a score of 4 is attached to 1 or 2 treatment teams from which 75 to 89% of their caseload is comprised. Score of 3 is 50 to 74%. And then in item 2 or score of 2, it gets into sort of these or statements. And again, they do this later in the document, so it's good for you to see it now. So score of 2 would mean employment specialists are attached to 3 or more mental health treatment teams, or they're served by individual mental health practitioners who are not organized into teams, or employment specialists are attached to 1 or 2 teams from which less than 50% of the employment specialist caseload is comprised. And then a score of 1 is, they're part of a VOC program that functions completely separately from the mental health treatment organization. Here is the item in the manual. Again, kind of the same rationale for this item that there was with a lower caseload size. We want to make sure that the team, they're working with a smaller number of teams so they can be very available to those teams, is the general sense of it. It's good if we were together and you had a highlighter or markers, I would have you underline or highlight or put a star next to this item right here. Even though I just read you all of that, it says do not score based on the number of mental health treatment teams from which the specialist receives referrals. So if an IPS specialist receives referrals from 4 mental health teams, but 90% of the referrals come from 2 of those teams, then the score is a 5. So the IPS folks kind of talk both ways about this, right? So it says up to 2 mental health treatment teams, and then it says from which 90% of the employment specialist caseload is comprised. So it is not enough to just find out how many teams they're assigned to. You actually have to get a team to help you understand where the people on their caseload came from. And I will tell you all, just something that's very regular occurrence on Fidelity reviews is you get there and they all say, I'm assigned to 2 teams. And you're like, great, high five. And you're in your brain as a reviewer, you're thinking they're probably going to get a 5 on that. Then you look at their caseloads and it's like, well, hold on. You've got people who are referred to you from 4 or 5 teams, and none of them are 90%. So like you have to kind of wade into it with folks and have them help you understand, okay, you say you're assigned to 2 teams. And so does that mean you attend 2 team meetings? Yes. Okay. So there's a little check mark there. And you have to kind of go through some of the questioning to kind of understand exactly how they regard themselves as assigned to teams, because it's not always as cut and dry as a score of 5. Often it's something less than a 5, that, and you have to have them help you figure out what it ends up being. And Dawn and Darren, is that sort of your experience with Fidelity reviews too? Is that every once in a while it's kind of as written in the manual, but more often than not, you do really have to get into a real dialogue about what exactly is it?
definitely. And there's I'm getting better at figuring that out in the moment so that I don't miss the opportunity to ask the person that we're interviewing at that moment.
Yeah.
That's one of the challenges of being a Fidelity reviewer too. If it's not cut and dried, then you potentially have to ask those additional questions. But you've got a window of time when you're interviewing someone that hopefully you ask them that question. So you got to be
Right.
thinking kind of ahead to consensus scoring sort of the whole while.
Definitely.
I really think you have to have that strategy and make sure you have some of those, questions in your toolbox or you interview, attaché, so to speak, to be able to get some of that information. But I've also had some times where I do follow up with the contact of the agency to try to get some additional information. So there's some wiggle room always to kind of do some follow up to get some clarification to kind of help with the consensus scoring piece. Plus, as Don mentioned, all the great notes that everybody takes during the review.
Oh yeah, we haven't talked about notes. That's a good reminder. All of these discussions, thank you, Darren, for the teaser on that one, are great reminders for us to, as a Fidelity reviewer, take notes that make sense to you so you can have this discussion when you get back together with the other reviewers. Often, if Darren and Dawn and I are on a Fidelity review together, what might happen is Darren interviews one person, Dawn interviews another person, and I either I'm on a phone call or I'm doing a chart review all at the same time. So what Dawn sees, what Darren sees, and what Paul sees, we don't have a collective view of it. So taking the notes in a way that I can articulate when we get back together, oh, I did this, this is what I heard, this is what I saw. And you might have Darren say, yes, that's consistent with what I heard from this other person we interviewed. And you kind of validate some of the things you hear in interviews by trading your notes like that. So take good notes for sure. You don't have to remember all of this material or any of this material after today or Wednesday, but what we want you to remember is take good notes because the rest of it you can find free online. So let's talk about some examples real quickly. You've got the first one, an agency has 3 treatment teams and 1 employment specialist. The employment specialist attends each team meeting and receives referrals from all 3 teams. 30% come from the first team, 30% come from the second team, and 40% from the third team. The score for this item is a 3 because the maximum you can put together in any of those combinations is 70% of the people on their caseload coming from 2 mental health treatment teams. So that's right in the range here, 50 to 74%. Another one, some of these examples, like I feel like I have to write them all out. IPS specialist has 8 people on their caseload from team A, 9 from team B, and 2 from team C. Score for this item is a 4 because 89% of the caseload is from 2 teams. So they go through the math with this for you. So there's 19 total people on the caseload, and they use team A and team B to get 17 people. Divided by 19 is 89%. And if you, again, walk it over here, you're right at the range, 75 to 89%. An IPS program is part of a rehab agency. Referrals to IPS are from individual mental health practitioners at multiple agencies. Separate from the rehab agency, the score is a 1. I think teams that are only IPS agencies tend to struggle here. And in the, what is certainly a worthwhile discussion is how do they get referrals and who are they connecting with? Now, I have seen this go very well too, where the IPS agency that only provides IPS has office space at an external agency. They're there, let's say, 3 days a week. They can get referrals. They can do warm handoffs. They meet with those clinical teams weekly. It's rare. It's harder to get it really done well in those setups, but it is possible. It just takes another agency to help you with it. Really, is what it comes down to. Some of these examples are just a reiteration more of the same. I'm going to go back here on my poll. All right, this one's not a word cloud. This is a multiple choice I've got an example I completely made up. An employment specialist is assigned to 4 treatment teams. The number of clients from each treatment team is 10, 8, 1, and 1. What score would you want to give on integration through team assignment? So they're at 10, 8, 1, and 1 are the 4 teams. I'm gonna check my math now. And if you're having trouble joining the poll, you can always just drop it in chat. So just want to know what score you would give. I'll flash this up on the screen. So it's a team that supports 4 mental health treatment teams. They have 10 from team 1, 8 from team 2, 1 from team 3, and 1 from team 4. Anybody want to venture a guess of which score we'd be giving them? Looks like Jose said a 3. We had 3, and we had 60% right now are saying a score of 5, 40% are saying a score of 3. And now it's back to 50-50. This is the best part about polls is the more people vote, the more I have to wait for the votes to kind of stabilize. So it looks like we're between 3 and 5 on this one. Well, let's look at them. So, okay. To get a 3, we'd have to say they're attached to 1 or 2 mental health teams from which 50 to 74% of their caseload is comprised. And if we give them a score of a 5, they would be attached to 1 or 2 teams from which 90 to 100% of their caseload is comprised. So on this one, if you take the 10 and the 8, the team with 10 people on the IPS team and the team with 8, that would give you 18 people on the caseload out of a total caseload of 20, which would mean 90% of the referrals are coming from 2 teams. So we would be able to give them a 5. For anybody who said 3, I'm kind of curious. Keep in mind, it's an example I completely fabricated. So I'm a inherently flawed human. I'm not perfect. I'm open to listen to why people might think it's a 3. Maybe it's a trick question. I don't know.
Well, and I would say this is the kind of conversation we have in consensus scoring. And the thing that I like is consensus scoring when you do it with the Fidelity reviewer team is very much not non-judgmental, safe, whatever, haven't had enough coffee today. And so we have the conversations, and sometimes it's like, wow, I didn't consider that. Yeah, you're right. And other times it's no, this is kind of what we're going to end up needing to score it because of the parameters. So this is a great conversation to have as far as why a 3 potentially. I'd love that too. And if it's ooh, I goofed, that's part of it. I will always default back to I haven't had enough coffee.
You never have enough coffee.
I'm thinking that's true. I've had 2 cups today. So I see 20 divided by 4 equals 50, which equals a 3. Is if 20 is max, the 5.
Yeah, 20 would be how much, like the highest, you'd want caseloads for the highest score there. And I think I'm going to put it in the chat too, sort of my math, and then we can
Thank-
see what,
Sorry.
no, it's okay. Then we'll just, when I set this up, it was a real example, but that was probably 2.5 years ago. I'll show you some of my rationale, I guess you'd say.
That's actually taken me quite a while to get to the point of asking folks about percentage of their referrals that come from what different, teams, because sometimes in the reviews, they'll say, well, we get referrals from 5 different places. And so then it said, what are those numbers like, or what's the percentage like if you need to do it that way? And sometimes I just let them do the percentage themselves.
Yeah, and often too, what they tell us in an interview is different than what we see on paper.
Yep.
When they show us their caseload list, and it's not because anybody's trying to do anything bad or anything like that.
Yep.
I think in their head, when we say like, where do you get your referrals from? People just like, they come from all over. I mean, technically, if we're talking about who I get referrals from, it's everybody and their brother. But really, it is about sort of the assignments. And in general, again, rationale wise, you'd want them assigned to the 2 teams where they're getting most of the referrals. So,
Mhm.
In the example I used, if they're going to the team meetings for the teams that they get one person from, I don't think there's value in that. Maybe a different employment specialist could go to one of those teams, because the team where they have received 10 and received 8 are really where the sort of quote unquote business is for them.
Or maybe they could go to the team meeting where they referred one on one occasion and do some soliciting of referrals.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be a regular basis. It might be go and do some education or, something along that line.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I put my rationale up. We can go over more examples of this one if people want to, or we can move on. It's either one is fine with me. I think I'll do a little more. Let's see here. Okay, here's another one where they kind of have different employment specialists having different levels of it. So an IPS unit includes 3 employment specialists. Specialist A is attached to 2 teams from which 90% of her caseload is comprised. That's a score of 5. A second employment specialist receives referrals from 3 teams and has 7 people from each team. So that is 66% of the caseload coming from 2 teams, which gives that specialist a score of 3. The third IPS specialist receives referrals from 2 teams, and 25% of their caseload is referred from vocational rehabilitation and doesn't get mental health services from the 2 teams they're assigned to, which is a score of 4. And so you're averaging these scores together. So it's a score of 5, a score of 4, and a score of 3 is 12. 12 divided by 3 is an average of 4 for this particular score. That one's a little got some more complexities. My examples aren't that bad. See, let's see here.
Thank you for going easy on us non-mathematician.
Well, you got to start somewhere. Yeah, I mean, when I first started Fidelity reviewing, and I was like, hold on, I actually have to do math to score some of these things. Now it's not rough math, but still, I don't think I was ready for that part. They didn't tell me that part. Let's put it that way. Okay, so let me go to the next one. I don't think it's nothing in chat. This is an item where you kind of measure it 2 ways. So you're measuring integration with the mental health treatment team through assignment on this item we just reviewed. The next one now is integration with the mental health team or the treatment team through frequent team member contact. Now, this one is one, there's a lot of items like this in the Fidelity scale. There are components that need to be present in order for you to give points. So we have 5 key components 5 total points that can be awarded. So basically, if you can say, put a check by this one, say it's there, they get a point for that one. So the 5 components are attending weekly treatment team meetings, participating actively in treatment team meetings with shared decision-making, documentation being integrated into the client's treatment record, the office being in close proximity, and the specialist helping the team think about employment who haven't yet been referred to supported employment services. And again, it is, if it's there, they get points. And you'll be able to know some of this from interviews, and then you get to observe team meetings when you're doing a fidelity review. And those are good opportunities to ask how often does this meeting take place and who's present, et cetera, to get at some of this. The rationale, of course, is it makes a lot of sense, right? That for the teams I'm assigned to, frequent contact means at a minimum, we're having good communication, and at a maximum, people aren't getting conflicting messages. Everybody's supporting the work that each other are doing, including the client. So again, it makes a lot of sense. And like we talked earlier, IPS units that serve other populations obviously connect with another set of service providers than mental health practitioners. So whatever the service team is for those relevant populations are what we try to use. And what's nice about the manual is it takes items like this that are broken out in components, and it gives you a whole section just on the component. So, for attending weekly mental health treatment team meetings, we're just going to ask, how often do you attend the meeting? Do you participate in the entire meeting? Do you get 5 minutes at the end, or are you a full-fledged team member talking about everything on the agenda? It goes into some kind of details here. So some agencies have treatment plan meetings where the entire meeting is devoted to 1 or 2 folks. We would not give credit here. They have to be structured. The meetings have to be structured in a way so that an employment specialist can ask for help. They're also designed to allow the employment specialist to help the treatment team think about employment for people that they haven't referred yet. So again, it's easy to know when you see a good meeting occur, but often, we may have recommendations on these meetings for people, whether it's in terms of how often it is. We may have recommendations on, potential agenda edits that they could do to help the collaboration between the employment team. Then it gives you some examples. The examples, for a meeting like this, I wouldn't know too much about the examples, but again, goes into the components in a very elaborate way, very detailed way. And if you go over to the Fidelity scale again, really, I guess, try to think about what I would want to know if I were sitting in your shoes. I would want to know, what do you usually see? So what you usually see is, pretty often weekly treatment team meetings. Sometimes teams meet every other week. Another thing that you might notice the more you do these are that the employment specialist, that active participation in treatment teams looks different. So in some, it looks exactly like you think. But in others, you can tell that the employment specialist sort of has a place on the agenda to talk about their cases, which is not what we're looking for here. And then I think something we run into pretty regularly is employment specialists supporting teams that sit in different buildings for an agency. An agency, let's say maybe they have 3 locations across a geographic catchment area, and you want to provide the service to those other buildings, of course, and the treatment team in there. But then it comes down to, do you have office space there? Because your office should be in close proximity. And sometimes, I've done Fidelity reviews in Chicago where they'll say it's in close proximity because it's 2 miles away. But I ask, because I'm me, I ask follow-up questions like, oh, well, if we got in the car right now, how long would it take us to get there? And they're like, oh, well, it's Chicago, it'll still take us an hour and a half. Okay, well, I'm not certain that rises to the level of close proximity. And we would recommend that, they have Tuesday afternoon office hours or something like that to really, really lock in this close proximity item.
You know, and Paul, to highlight the importance of the manual. One time here, a year or two or whatever ago, I decided I wanted to look up in the manual how they define close proximity. An example that they gave is if the agency is in a multi-story building, they should be on the same floor.
Yeah.
Which I thought was well, it made sense. How many of those water cooler conversations do you have when you're, heading to the bathroom or the water cooler or whatever, and a person says, "Oh my gosh, I forgot to tell you such and such about so and so," kind of a thing. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and here's that part of the manual right there. It's one of the examples, right? The mental health teams are on first and second floors, and the IPS team is on the third floor. And it says they do not give credit for this item. A little more hardcore than we're used to, a little more rigid than we're used to with the Fidelity manual, but it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So the next example, actually, IPS specialist employed by the rehab agency is an office at that agency and office space with his assigned mental health treatment team at the mental health agency. Spends a majority of his office time at the mental health agency location. So we would give credit. And so, even take it a little bit further, they give credit, they recommend giving credit, even if the employment specialist doesn't have their own office at the mental health agency, as long as office space is available when he or she is there. So just some nuance, and hopefully you all can see why we're saying it's good to have this manual and flip through it, and as we're talking today, follow along and kind of see. So Laura, this is a great question. This is something the pandemic really hasn't addressed. So Laura asked in the chat, how would this be scored if the office is remote only? And so you got a real mixed bag right now with the pandemic. So the IPS Employment Center has not recommended scoring throughout the duration of the pandemic. However, multiple states, including Washington, do provide a score, because sometimes there's like contractual language at the state level that says you have to provide a score. And sometimes funding is not in Washington, but in other states, funding for your program is contingent upon your Fidelity score. So not having a Fidelity score could mean there's no funding in those states. So you can see where it's a mixed bag. So long story short, there really isn't specific guidance on it, at least that I'm aware of. What I'm aware of that the IPS Employment Center has said is, during the pandemic, in lieu of scoring, we should continue the Fidelity review process, but consider it like a qualitative review, where it's much more open-minded, and we give recommendations and comment on strengths without a score. But it is a challenge, and Donna, Darren, you and I have done a couple Washington reviews, and I mean, the ones I'm thinking of, I don't think we really had to contend with this much, because I don't think the agencies were in a virtual office. They had like office space at the time.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, later when we get into things like job development, I mean, also, the virtual environment is something to contend with there, because often now hiring managers are working remotely. So it's kind of like,
Yeah.
how do you get out face to face to folks like that? So it's a great question. I don't have any specific guidance
It is.
on a remote office for an employment specialist. Do you, Dawn or Darren, have you encountered that at all?
I don't necessarily, because I was surprised to find that some of the agencies that we've done Fidelity reviews with continued to meet face to face. Surprisingly, even during the pandemic, and obviously with social distancing and masks and things along that line. But yeah, a great question, Laura. Keep them coming. That's a really good one.
Yeah, it
I
is.
think part of what we've done is if they're doing services remotely, are they still meeting with their teammates? Do they have some kind of way to contact their teammates, like in the moment? Are they meeting with individuals, hopefully via Zoom or something, or face to face? Or there was an agency up in the northeast corner of the state that continued providing services, but they would sit outside and talk to the person through their window. And there were just a multitude of people being creative and trying to still provide the best service that they could. So yeah, that was, it's been interesting. I
Yeah.
see Marlene asked questions.
Yep. Marlene has sort of questions regarding the format. What's the format of the review? Are we asking them these questions, reviewing paperwork, watching them while they work with someone, do job development, long-term support, and do we talk to clients and ask questions? Pretty much yes to all of those. So in general, the format for our Fidelity review. So pre-pandemic, Fidelity reviewers would go to an agency for 2 days and usually sit in a conference room or something like that. That'd be the headquarters, but then you'd have interviews scheduled with staff, interviews scheduled with consumers, interviews with other stakeholders like vocational rehab counselors, members of executive leadership. You'd look through clinical records, you'd look through other documentation the agency could provide for you, and you'd observe some meetings, and you would observe job development, go out in the community and observe job development. Now, since the pandemic, we've embraced some virtual formats to some of this. Like job development, for example. The ones I've been to in Washington were kind of hybrid, that they weren't 100% virtual and they weren't 100% face to face. So I think, again, this is a situation where you've got sort of the pre-pandemic prescribed approach, and then you've got what we're all doing, like kind of to Dawn's point. I mean, how do we stay connected in whatever way we can so that we can provide some feedback to groups, agencies doing this work, and so I think I would guess that coming out of the pandemic we'll see more use of sort of hybrid virtual Fidelity reviewing. That would be my guess. I think we've all learned things from the pandemic, and I think one of the things we've learned is that it doesn't matter where I'm physically sitting if I'm reviewing a document, or that's not necessary. The face-to-face things that probably need to happen are some of the interviews, observing job development, that sort of thing. So I would guess, and I don't know if they've tipped their cards or even announced it yet, Dawn and Darren, but I would imagine everything in this sort of healthcare industry is going to try to be hybrid when it can be after the pandemic.
Yeah, I sort of think it looks like that, and I'm going in part on kind of my own healthcare providers and what they're planning on doing in the future. And it sounds like there's far more in the way of virtual stuff still, but I think agencies and obviously job development is best done face to face. Serving individuals, there were just an awful lot of them that didn't want to have to do Zoom meetings and things, or they didn't
Right.
have the technology, or they didn't have, the skills to be able to connect, or, whatever. So I'm thankful to see that we're getting back to a lot of the face-to-face kind of stuff. I did a face-to-face Fidelity review this last week, and the other team members were there, and it was all face-to-face. It's just amazing the difference.
Yeah.
Much like job development, it's so much better if you can do it face-to-face.
Yeah, I think just the premise of an interview for a Fidelity review is a better premise when it's face to face and not virtual. People come in thinking that they don't want to say the wrong answer or get anybody in trouble, and I think it's so difficult to push that out of the way if you're virtual.
Yeah.
Because when you're there, you can kind of use your interviewing sort of skills to kind of put people at ease and help them understand your purpose, and it's not to get anybody in trouble and so on and so forth. But boy, it's just really hard to sell that virtually, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, we do very, very hard at trying to help the agency staff, the participants, the family members that we interview, whoever we interview, we try and help them feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Very clear that this is not a system where this isn't an audit. We're not going to take away money. We're not going to, impose sanctions, which just we're going to make some recommendations. You get to choose which ones you try and follow up on, where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And so it's very much a mentoring, continuous quality improvement kind of thing. It's not an audit.
Yeah, it's collaborative. And again, I mean, as reviewers, we couldn't complete a review without the help of the team. So it's it's to our advantage, it's to the team's advantage for us to work together to kind of reveal whatever needs to be revealed to arrive at scoring. So, yeah, I'm going to do one more and then maybe take another short break. So next item is collaboration between employment specialists and voc rehab counselors. So for this item, we want frequent contact to discuss shared clients and identifying potential referrals. And again, it's pretty easy. For a score of 5, we'd be looking for scheduled face-to-face meetings at least once a month, and client-related contacts at least weekly. And that could be phone, email, in person, whatever, just to discuss the business, the work. This is primarily evaluated through an interview with a vocational rehabilitation counselor. In most agencies, it seems like DVR appoints like a liaison type counselor to an organization, which is great. In other cases, I mean, I've been to IPS agencies where you look at the schedule on day 1 and you've got to interview like 3 different counselors from 3 different offices. Not good or bad, but it's just, another layer, a little bit more complex. Now, in a weird way, during the pandemic, this one has been, I think, easier for teams to satisfy, because in a weird way, we all kind of got a little bit more available by being able to leverage virtual technology to meet with people. So that's something I've noticed just anecdotally, that whereas before people might say, we meet every 2 weeks because we can't clear schedules, during the pandemic, people have been able to make it happen pretty easily with virtual platforms, even if they meet for 30 minutes or something. I mean, it counts. Totally counts. And the examples show the different ways that people can do this. And again, the gradient there. So for a 5, you're meeting monthly. For a 4, scheduled face-to-face meetings at least quarterly. So less than monthly. And then let's see here. Then a score of 3 and below really is less of the scheduled face-to-face meeting and more of the client-related context as needed. And then a score of 1 is if there's no relationship there. Now, I have seen that, and it is really an awkward interview to interview a voc rehab counselor who very clearly does not have any relationship with the agency, and they don't communicate. It's an easy recommendation to make as a Fidelity reviewer, though, that you guys should start communicating. Find a way to meet regularly. It's a very easy recommendation to make. So let me take a break right there. We're about 5 minutes before the hour. I just want to give some space to this group and see if people have questions or things that are going through their mind. How does this work, or anything like that, before we take another 10 or so minute break and then get back together and keep chugging through the material. Or Dawn or Darren, if you have announcements you want to make to the group, this is also a good time to chime in.
I just wanted to add, you mentioned a little bit about how we come together and make recommendations. And I just want to kind of highlight how, strategic some of those recommendations can be, just like Paul mentioned with the meetings with vocational rehab. It might be just adding more meetings, making those connections and having those kind of frequent connections. So the nice thing about Fidelity, sometimes within the anchors, the recommendations are already there for you just to kind of phrase and build that level of support with folks. I know in Washington State, it's been more of a challenge, particularly if agencies aren't a certified rehab program and have a contract with DVR. It might be harder to make those relationships, but I just want to really encourage that even in the application process, job seekers can benefit from going through that eligibility process and access to benefit planning through DVR before they become eligible. So there can still be some win-wins and access to resources for individuals, even if your organization is not a CRP with DVR.
Well, and as far as announcements, just wanted to speak to the group about the fact that we are still looking for agencies that are willing to host a baseline or a follow-up review. Baseline meaning your first one, much like anything else when you talk about baseline, and then follow-up meaning you've had a baseline and you're going to do a second or third or however many review. Pardon me, goodness. We have incentive contracts for agencies in order to sign up to do those reviews. We also have incentive contracts in order for agencies to sign up to be Fidelity reviewers. If you're interested in knowing more, I can put our emails back in the chat box. But do consider, Fidelity is a great way to get some free feedback related to how your agency is doing, and maybe to get some recommendations that you might not have thought of otherwise, in order to make improvements to your program. I'm pretty sure that we're all about continuous quality improvement. So I see Ruby said she has to hop off. Thanks for being here, Ruby. Anyway, so contact me or Darren if you're interested in participating in Fidelity reviews in one fashion or another.
And they're not as tough as you think, I promise. We haven't said this yet, but Darren and Dawn and Paul don't have any special skill or genius chromosome. At least I know I don't. I guess I can't say that about you guys.
Yeah.
All I know about Fidelity reviewing is from going through something like this and then observing Fidelity reviews and then being on live Fidelity reviews as a reviewer.
Definitely.
And so again, if you're sitting out there and you're wondering if, gosh, what if I don't remember all this? You can't. I don't. That's why I have a dog-eared Fidelity review manual with a bunch of Post-it notes and highlighting and scribblings in the margin. So nobody expects you to remember all of it. I think at some level, the only expectation is at least a level of familiarity with the process, because at the end of the day, you've heard Dawn and Darren and I all say today, when we don't know what to do, we go to the manual and we look for this item and see if the manual provides any insight for us. So that's the skill you got to have, is you have to be able to be prepared and have that manual either in hand or available electronically. Other than that, all the rest is experience that we're happy to give you through the process Dawn is talking about. And again, I don't think I've told this group this, it's also not, a contentious process. There's no, knockdown, drag out battles with agencies about scoring or anything like that. All of the agencies that I visit are happy to see us. They treat us right. They're very courteous, and they want to show their work because they want us to give them the most accurate score. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and another thing to know, and I don't know, I don't think I heard you mention it, Paul, and I haven't yet, or Darren. If you sign up to be a Fidelity reviewer, either Darren or I at this point in time are the lead Fidelity reviewer. So you're actually on a team where, kind of between interviews and things, you can ask us questions. You can ask questions of people being interviewed, but you don't necessarily have to. We don't push anybody into asking questions if they're not feeling confident yet. Trust me, Darren and I talk plenty. And yes, in this case, I am saying Darren too. We both ask that. I see a thumbs up from Darren. We ask questions and then we'll periodically check with the other team members. Do you have questions you want to ask? There is also a list of questions we draw from, so you don't have to think of them from scratch. So I see Michael says he's taken part in 4 reviews at this point in time, 2 different agencies. Found each one to be incredibly helpful. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I think they are. I just, years ago, I was in an agency where we were reviewed 3 different times, and I got to be part of a review team. And all the difference in the world in regards to your confidence level about, are you doing Fidelity, are you not, what could you do differently? It just, and the bottom line, helping more people to get jobs.
Yep. Yeah, shared goal for sure.
You bet.
Well, let's do this. Let's take another break, and we'll come back at 10 after, and then we'll kind of keep going through this. And if people think of questions and they want to put them in the chat while we're on break, that's great. We can start with those. But otherwise, we are making good progress, and we'll be in good shape. So I'll talk to you guys in about 9 or 10 minutes.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay, I'm back. It looks like we've had a question in the chat too. I'll probably wait one more minute, then maybe we'll start with that, Dawn.
I apologize. I was out of the room and I heard my name coming back in.
I was just saying we got a question in the chat on break, and so I was just going to start with that before we get back to it.
Oh, very nice. I
What
appreciate
I'll
folks are contributing and using the chat, and they're, once again, welcome to do it that way or to unmute if they'd like, but thanks for their participation. I think it makes it for a better training if we get questions and comments and things like that, and can tailor it a little more to what you need.
Yeah, I agree. Everything's easier if we're all talking, I think.
Yep.
So what I wanted to share was in the table of contents of the Fidelity manual. Let me go back. Sorry. The question was in the chat. Interested in learning more about actual time allotment to do reviews. What does that look like? And so, first of all, there's a time required to complete the review section that I would draw your eyes to. So in general, the manual says the Fidelity review requires at least 1.5 days. It is, we generally budget 2 days rather than 1.5 days. It's true what it says here. The size of the agency may also affect the amount of time. In my experience, where the agency is situated affects the amount of time. And again, I'll use probably both extremes, either a large metropolitan area or a very rural area. Some of the things that we do are interviews or observations that require going off site. So those things can complicate things. The example I will give you there is I'm a Fidelity reviewer in Illinois, and when I go to a Chicago agency, City of Chicago, if you're going to observe job development, if you get caught in traffic or whatever, it might be a 2.5 hour, 3 hour adventure. So losing that half day would really be a problem. So again, we just budget 2 days. And again, pre-pandemic, the way it went for me was the rate that I have as a reviewer includes all the travel and lodging. So if I was going to review in, let's say, downtown Chicago, I would travel to downtown Chicago the night before. I would report to the organization on day 1 of the Fidelity review in the morning. I would spend a whole day there doing the Fidelity review stuff, go back to the hotel that night. The next morning on day 2 of the Fidelity review, come back to the agency, conclude the Fidelity review. That evening, I would travel home. Now, during the pandemic and, to right now, we've got some hybrid stuff going on. So it's not always involving the travel is the first thing. And, we can leverage platforms like this pretty well at this point. So I'm trying to think, the last Fidelity review I did was completely virtual. And the one I did before that was sort of part virtual, part in person, sort of a hybrid. Still 2 days. As a Fidelity reviewer, I don't do Fidelity reviewing like in the evening after day 1 or anything like that. Like I try to really compress my Fidelity review activities to the 2 days I'm present at the agency. Part of the Fidelity review process is writing a Fidelity report, and that happens after the Fidelity review, of course. So there is that sort of time, but that's not a heavy lift. That doesn't take hours upon hours or anything like that. There's a template that we have available to us as Fidelity reviewers that you can use. So it's about 2 days, maybe travel, depending on a lot of factors. But Dawn and Darren, you guys you're doing face-to-face, but you do some things virtually, don't you?
This is Darren. We're really focusing on pivoting to do face-to-face reviews at the agencies. And with the end of the pandemic to really focus on, that IPS structure and model of conducting these face to face. So definitely a lot of the, initial setup and sharing information to get ready for the review. That's still will be, a lot of virtual things and, setting up meetings ahead of time before the review. I've had some virtual meetings with agencies before that. So there's still a little bit, but for conducting the review, we're looking at doing those face to face.
Sure.
And I think, was something to let the group know is that Paul has kind of looked at the fact that it's just Darren and I and the number of agencies there are, and that there's a physical impossibility for the two of us to do all the reviews that are needed, which is why we're trying to work on a Fidelity reviewer cadre. And at some point in time, individuals that will be lead reviewers that aren't just us. So the scenario is trying to be time efficient. And the face-to-face reviews that we've gone back to are doing pretty much exclusively face-to-face, except for, as Darren said, some of the prep stuff. But I'm thinking we might have to look at that hybrid format that the IPS Employment Center has sent out in regards to, 1 day virtual and 1 day face-to-face. And I don't know, it's still a work in progress, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so any feedback that folks have for us is a good thing.
And I'll tell you, as a guy that's gone through 2 Fidelity reviews myself at my own agency over the last probably month or so, month and a half, that were both, one was hybrid, one was completely virtual. I mean, it's kind of, it's kind of the same one way or the other, as the agency getting reviewed. I think the efficiencies, while there are things that absolutely need to be face-to-face in a Fidelity review, I do think, and again, not Washington specific, but I do think it's worth evaluating. Can we have some of the things be virtual, and will that eliminate some transportation or travel? Because I think that's a limiter for agencies in a lot of ways. Is not only do I have to have somebody not be at work these 2 days, but then I got to pay to send them over to some other agency, and it's worthwhile work, but they're not going to be here for 2 days, and I'm paying for them to go travel. So I wonder, I guess, if in general across the United States we're able to get more reviewers by providing a little bit of that relief to the travel part of it. All right, Marlene, great question. Is it a team that does the review? How do you get asked to do one? Well, yes, it's a team. There's usually 3 or 4 folks. And what we typically do with this training is we spend like day 1 kind of doing some what's in the book content, and then day 2 on Wednesday, we'll talk all about start to finish what is what's the process of a Fidelity review. But yeah, ideally you've got at least 3 people on your Fidelity review team. So 3 Fidelity reviewers with 1 lead reviewer. And how do you get asked to do one? I really think you just email Dawn and Darren, and they'll ask you. they'll help you get it figured out. Washington really wants to get more Fidelity reviewers built up. So I'd put that call out again if anybody wants to email Dawn or Darren. And their emails are in our chat too earlier. I think Darren dropped them in there.
You bet. And I will say, Jacqueline said travel assist would be welcome. And for currently the incentive contracts are built such that there's enough money in it to pay for travel. But I know what I'm trying to do, and it may be different for Darren because just the Seattle area is different, but Eastern Washington, some of it is so rural that I'm trying to make sure that if it's let's say a Fidelity review in Spokane, there are other Spokane agencies sending the Fidelity reviewers, so that there isn't overnight travel needed. That's not always going to be the case. I mean, if we're going to do an agency in Tri-Cities or Yakima or Moses Lake or something like that, there aren't a boatload of providers necessarily in those areas, so it might be a little tougher to do and might require some travel. Or if we do that hybrid schedule where it's 1 day virtual, 1 day face-to-face, it would be possible to travel back and forth in the same day. Not comfortable, but possible.
Yeah, definitely. The goal is to centralize so that, we're not, putting that extra burden of a lot of travel on folks. But depending on those agencies who voted, to opt into our incentives for the baseline, looking at the reviewers that we can do, there'll definitely be some travel and engagement, but really trying to be, intentional about, bringing people in the same area together to do the reviews to limit that extra travel burden.
Yep, and I was just looking at the chat again. Yeah, so it's a conversation about sort of how to make it real, right? To be a Fidelity reviewer. But again, some of these are, the other side of it too, I think is, this is how we do it in Illinois. If I get asked, hey, are you available to do a review, such and such agency on such and such date? If I'm not available, I'm not available, so it's not like I have to do it. There's that. And I think Dawn and Darren, maybe it's good for us on a Wednesday, Dawn and Darren, to kind of review that incentive that we have just in detail for folks so they can take it back to their leaders if they want to follow up with you guys. Might be good to do. All right, I think we left off right here on vocational units. So let me kind of get to the right spot here. So vocational unit is where you look at the IPS team, and the rubric here is that at least 2 full-time employment specialists and a team leader comprise the employment unit. They have weekly client-based supervision following the supported employment model, in which strategies are identified and job leads are shared, and they provide coverage for each other's caseload when needed. So again, a 5 is basically reiterating that definition I just read to you. The difference between a 5 and a 4 really is how many times per month they meet. And then they also have an or clause in there related to rural areas. Score of 3 steps down to from a regularly scheduled meeting to discussion on a weekly basis. And then 2, they don't meet as a group at all. And then 1, employment specialists are not part of a vocational unit. Again, fairly straightforward on this one. Most agencies seem to have a couple employment specialists, so this doesn't seem to be a real issue. I think something to think about here is, on day 1, you really want to try to get in with the organization and find out who is the IPS supervisor. Sometimes they'll have a team lead or a manager that's their supervisor, but you really want to make sure that as a reviewer, your understanding is the, org chart supervisor, the IPS supervisor, or is the IPS supervision provided by someone else, just to make sure you're evaluating things appropriately. In the next item, role of employment supervisor. It's another one that's got 5 components. This is what we talked about just a second ago with according to the IPS model. There's a specific way that IPS wants the supervision to occur. So they want 1 supervisor responsible for no more than 10 employment specialists. And you can prorate that. They want weekly supported employment supervision. They want the supervisor communicating with mental health treatment team leaders. They want the supervisor to go accompany employment specialists doing job development. And they want the supervisor to be reviewing outcomes with the employment specialists and setting goals at least quarterly. And like the other component items, if all 5 are present, we're going to give them a score of 5. If 4 are present, we're going to give them a score of 4, etc. So kind of a busy one. The manual doesn't have much in the way of difference there. Oh, it's not scrolling for me. I wonder why. There it is. So yeah, kind of busy components, not too complex. A lot of words, but not super complex, if that makes any sense. It is important here, since you are evaluating a person, the supervisor, directly, it's good to point out to the team that like the score on this doesn't necessarily reflect somebody's skill level or intelligence or work ethic or anything like that. It's likely other things like too many additional work responsibilities or, the lack of a organizational process for supervision. So it is, I've had IPS supervisors tell me, I don't want to get a low score on this one. And they are implying to me that they feel like they're ineffective if they get a low score, and it's not at all the case. So it's just good as reviewers. Again, we're here to help them think about things in a different way, that sort of thing. So, so yeah, we want to be cautious with that. Here's a spot where I want to know from you guys, what kind of outcomes would you expect or would you want to see an IPS supervisor tracking when you're having this discussion with them? Because this will be in an interview with the IPS supervisor, or maybe talking with the employment specialist. But there's that piece where they review outcomes at least quarterly with the IPS team. What kind of things would you ideally want to be seeing them talk with their team about? And there are no wrong answers here. Yep, employment retention, employment outcomes, good. One of the things we measure in Illinois is employer contacts, good. How many clients working, how many receiving supports, awesome. Number of job placements, interviews, employer contacts, all great. Number enrolled in further education, yep, thanks Michael for putting that in the chat. In Illinois, some of the outcomes we measure are job starts, and then we also measure milestones of employment, like how many people have been employed 15 days, how many people have been employed 45 days, how many people have been enrolled or employed 90 days. We have another measure, it's not a formal measure, but we also kind of try to keep our eye on how many people have been employed 180 days or more. Because our agency has decided the goal isn't just to get people jobs, but it's to help them keep them. And Michael's saying, so the outcomes and capacities report info. Is that a specific Washington report that you're talking about, Michael?
Yeah, it's the monthly AmeriGroup report.
Okay.
Which has some good information in it.
Yeah.
And including, number of jobs and people in education and that kind of thing. I think one of the things that we find, and part of this is also sharing data with staff and leadership, is that that AmeriGroup report has some good data that then should be shared with staff, all staff, and leadership.
Yeah, I typically ask this question to IPS supervisors, and then I also ask it to employment specialists. What does your supervisor track for outcomes? And it's interesting how supervisor can give you everything they track. To Dawn's point, if the employment specialists don't know it's being tracked or don't know they're supposed to be working on it, that's is a different sort of discussion to be having about supervision, because this is the item for supervision. So and Michael has some more comments about the report that he mentioned. The other thing is, for IPS supervisors, they can make and they can import, certain data points from that report into their own sort of outcome tracking. Literally, they can do whatever they want in terms of managing the overall outcomes. So the next item is zero exclusion. Is exactly what it sounds like. The principles of IPS is that everybody who's interested in working has access to supported employment. We've got all kinds of, the definition is about a paragraph long here. Help when another job has ended. And basically clients are not screened out formally or informally. Score 5 is the definition Score of 4, though, this is where the gradient between scores is really important for you to pay attention to. Score of 4 means no evidence of exclusion, formal or informal. Referrals are not solicited by a wide variety of sources. Employment specialists offer to help with another job when one is ended, regardless of the reason the job ended. If you move to a 3, this is where it starts to get, you really have to have a discussion with your review team about it. Some clients are unable to access supported employment services due to perceived lack of job readiness. Score of 2 then is most clients are unable to unable to access supported employment services due to perceived lack of job readiness. And then 1 is there's a formal policy to exclude clients based on readiness. So this is really where, you might not know, is it some clients or is it most clients when you're sitting down to score? And so while you're in the fidelity review, if you're starting to think you're going to score an agency in a 2 or a 3 or less than a 5, let's say, it's really worth your effort to get in and kind of bring the supervisor back in and ask questions like, so, would you agree that some clients are not able to, or would you say it's most clients aren't able to access supported employment? And really kind of use the language in the rubric to try to understand where they see it. I've never been in a review where we could get this down to a number that says, 39% are unable to access supported employment. So a lot of this is really the review team taking all of the information you've read and heard in your interviews and arriving at whether it's 2 or 3 based on what you've heard and what you've seen. And that's where consensus scoring, where you're talking with your review team, really does kind of help, because A, you all arrive at an answer, and B, then you can all support that answer, whatever the score is, whatever the final score is. In most cases, zero exclusion, anything other than a 5 is not the result of the employment team, it's the result of other parts of an agency. And in a lot of ways, if you leave everything up to the employment team, they'll have a 5 on everything. But again, there's scores on integration, scores on relationships with voc rehab and things like that. So there are some things that aren't directly within their control. And it's okay to note that in the report too, and say, we understand, for example, I was at a review one time where the local vocational rehabilitation office had some staffing turnover and counselors, and so they didn't have a counselor assigned. And it was a real disaster for this agency to try to connect with vocational rehabilitation according to the Fidelity scale, because there wasn't a counselor for them to connect with in that way. So, the score was the score just because of the way the scale is written. And they understood, they weren't upset about it. They knew they were going to, most agencies read this stuff too, sorry, I scrolled too fast there. Moving on to agency focus on competitive employment. This is another component type item. We're looking to see that they have an intake that includes questions about interest in employment. And tip there, many times agency intakes will say, do you have a job, yes or no? But they don't say, do you want a job, yes or no? And so you would not be able to award this component if their questions don't ask about interest in employment. I've seen some intakes that, ask, have you ever been employed? Are you currently employed? But they stop short of, do you want to be employed? So just a tip there. Another item here, another component is questions about interest, again, in employment on all annual or semi-annual assessment or treatment plan reviews. Agencies displaying written postings like brochures or posters or whatever in the lobby or other waiting areas, and supporting ways for clients to share their work stories with other clients and staff. And then finally, measuring the rate of competitive employment on at least a quarterly basis and sharing outcomes with agency leadership and staff. And that's another one that agencies tend to struggle with. Sometimes people have trouble getting a rate of competitive employment, and sometimes people have trouble sharing it with agency leadership and staff. Other things to note on this item, that rate of competitive employment is for the entire agency, not just the employment team. So if you're at like a mental health center, for example, we'd be looking to see that there's a number that is for the entire organization, not just the employment team. The only other thing I'll say is for clients to share their work stories. The pandemic, this is something the pandemic has really impacted. Historically, you'd have clients that would come talk to groups of other clients or talk with staff, or there'd be a newsletter highlight or that sort of thing. And some of those things just got fewer and more far between during the pandemic. But for the most, the assessment and intake questions, most agencies are able to make that happen with their own form set, their own paperwork. Let's see here. I'm just looking at this rationale here. Yep, and again, it goes into the components literally one by one, with examples on each component. So the manual is going to be very, very helpful for you as you're learning more about becoming a reviewer. Another component item is executive team support for supported employment. It's exactly what it sounds like, that the agency executive team members understand supported employment and sustainability, and you can tell by these components. So the executive director or president or CEO or whatever demonstrates knowledge regarding principles of evidence-based supported employment. I'll tell you here, first of all, on day one, it's good to check in with agencies on all their titles. So some agencies don't have a CEO or executive director, they have a president. And so it's good just to kind of call it out, write it down, have your little organizational chart that you're drawing in your head or on paper, so you know who is who. And their knowledge about principles of evidence-based supported employment, it doesn't have to be word for word. If they can talk around the ideas of the principles of IPS, we give them credit, that's fine. The agency QA process has a review of the IPS program at least every 6 months. And they use the results of Fidelity scores or assessments to improve implementation. One member of the exec team actively participates in IPS leadership team meetings, which we call steering committee meetings, that happen every 6 months. The agency CEO or executive director communicates how these services support the mission of the agency. And it says here that this item is not delegated to another administrator. So that's important for you to hear and see. And that the IPS supervisor shares information about the barriers and facilitators with the exec team at least twice a year, with the idea that sometimes that group and the exec team are the only ones that can really make organizational changes that would impact those barriers. Part of a Fidelity review is you do sit down with some of the executive team in an interview. So you are going to hear some of this directly from executives, but the rest of it might be from meeting minutes. It might be from the IPS supervisor's interview. I think, yeah, again, fairly straightforward. Not too tricky, this one, that's for sure. And if you think like sitting down with executives at agencies is a scary part of a Fidelity review, I used to think that too. And the reality is, they're like any other person at any other agency. They want to do well, so they're not gonna gripe at you or anything like that. They're good, actually, really good people to talk with. When an agency is doing it really, really well, the executives will tell you in a very plain way all the things that they struggle with and exactly why they're struggling with them, with regard to IPS. So it is kind of nice to hear that transparency. Work incentives planning is the next one. It's for benefits planning. And again, the definition here is what the score of 5 is. Ideally, agencies are working directly with the benefits planner. And they are a specifically trained benefits planner. Anything less than a specifically trained benefits planner is really where the scoring starts at 4. So not using a benefits planner is where you're having like an employment specialist or other person offer the client assistance in figuring this out. A 3 is an employment specialist discusses with each client changes in benefits based on work status. 2 would be just handing out information, and 1 is that there's literally zero work incentives planning. And I think most folks on this call should be or are familiar with benefits planners. There's a very specific training that people have to go through to get certified to do it. It's not cheap, and it's most agencies don't have someone in-house that does it. Like in Illinois and Iowa, we use people that work for other organizations. Like one works for the state of Iowa, the other 2 work for the state of Illinois, et cetera. But they're specifically trained and they know more about benefits than I'll ever learn. And if somebody shows up with benefits that are different than the standard, railroad benefits or something just kind of that you're not used to working with, they'll know all about it, because that's exactly what the certification does. Disclosure, again, it is what it sounds like. We go in, we don't want to require that people disclose. Sorry about the fast scrolling there. We want to give clients choices and help them make an informed decision about what is revealed to their employer about a disability. It's another one with components. Components are that we don't require all clients to disclose their disability in order to receive services. We discuss the costs and benefits or pros and cons of disclosure. We discuss exactly what information is going to be disclosed. And we do that because we don't want to say yes, disclose or no, disclose. That's very broad. It's best to have really a circle drawn around the specific information, because there's so many different ways you can disclose. And you certainly don't want to disclose more than is necessary. And then employment specialists discuss disclosure on more than one occasion, with the idea that it's kind of, maybe it depends on the potential employer. Maybe it depends on how the client feels about it today or next week or 2 months from now. But this one's got 4 components. If 4 are present, they get a 5. If none are present, they get a 1. And again, it's you're gonna hear this stuff as part of the process here. So I'm wondering from you, like, think about your agency or agencies you know of. What would you expect to see? And I guess I could even say or hear in an agency that you would say has got good evidence of disclosure. Because I think there's a default that most of us think about. And so I'm just kind of wondering from this group, what are things you would expect to see as a Fidelity reviewer that you would think would be good disclosure? Okay, written policy about it. I like that. Oh, I thought I saw another one pop up. Right, Jose says earned income disregard. Use of the disclosure worksheet in the beginning and whenever there's a change in status. All right. Yep, specifics, client quotes, even. Definitely. And as much as I want to sit here and tell you there's a way it should look or something like that, every agency does it a little bit differently. So maybe a workbook or short class about disclosure in the ADA. Yep, definitely, that'd be awesome. The bare minimum I've seen from agencies on fidelity reviews is like releases of information that are signed by the client that say, this is what it is. And then someone else put clear documentation on if the question was asked and what the client wants. Definitely. So yeah, the bare minimum I've seen is a release of information. There's a worksheet on the IPS Works website, the pros and cons worksheet that you can use. Some people build this into their vocational assessment, and then they follow up on it at different intervals throughout treatment. So this is a great example of how, even though there's some prescriptive comments about what components need to be present, there's still flexibility for agencies on exactly how they implement it. And what I end up thinking is really the best evidence of this is when you're interviewing clients who've received employment services and you ask, did they require you to disclose anything about your disability? It's always interesting to hear what clients have to say. And at a place where they're doing it really, really well, the clients can articulate very clearly that no, they told me I didn't have to, and that it's up to me. We talked about why it could be good and why it could be bad. We even had little scripts of what I could say to a potential employer. So while all of these things that we're talking about, not all of them, but most of them could end up in a chart that you would see and review, I've always found that the best authority on some of this really ends up being the clients who are receiving the services.
Hey,
Oh yeah, go ahead, Darren.
I just wanted to add that, when we come in and do reviews, and definitely Don and I have done some trainings on disclosure, we do see some people, that utilize the worksheet and the pros and cons from the IPS library. But it's also great just to have a little bit of role playing so that you can actually, use that as a tool to work with the job seeker to kind of gauge where their fears are and where their comfort level is, and really find out what information they're comfortable with sharing, or you sharing as a job developer or not. So I just want to say that it's always good to kind of do a little bit of role play as you prepare for job development and being out in the community, so you have a good sense of what the job seeker is comfortable with you sharing, or together sharing as you develop resumes and start building that network for applying to businesses.
Thanks, Darren. The ongoing work-based vocational assessment is what it sounds like. There are some particulars that are worth noting. For high fidelity, we'd want to see that the voc assessment occurs over 2 to 3 sessions and is updated. And it's got, all of the information that should be included. I will say most vocational assessments, including the one you can get from IPS Works, have all of those things and more, all of those content areas and more. For score 5, again, it's the definition. It's not anything, more elaborate than just the definition. I think, because I'm me, I think I have a whole question about the assessment. I guess I'm just kind of curious from the group. I'm wondering why you guys think doing an assessment over 2 to 3 sessions and updating it would be the standard. And the reason I ask this is, again, coming from a mental health center, I don't think there's I've never ever seen a requirement for a mental health assessment to be done over 2 to 3 sessions, or that it be updated necessarily. So I guess I'm just kind of wondering why this group thinks the IPS Works folks went and did set it up this way for us. All right, we've got depends on if more info is needed. In the chat, I should say. Why do we think IPS would say 2 to 3 sessions? Yep, takes time to build rapport. You got 2 folks saying it's an opportunity to build rapport. Sure. Yeah, definitely. So let's flip over to the rationale here. Let's scroll fast, so please watch your eyes. Um, so again, back to this all being individualized. We certainly don't want a cookie cutter approach to assessing people. That won't lead to very individualized work or service, right? Um, um, so we want to spend a few weeks understanding what the person wants, not what the person has done for jobs in the past or anything like that, but what they want, what they like, what they enjoy, skills, experiences, with the idea that the effort you put in on the front end of assessment, it should pay off in finding individualized work for them. So yeah, it's all about rapport and helping understand what the client truly wants. And then Jacqueline put a question in the chat: are other regions or agencies having challenges with ability to self-advocate and retention of employment specialists to serve the public? And Dawn, Darren, I don't know if you're hearing that from other agencies or regions in Washington.
This is Darren. Yeah, there is a lot of challenges about maintaining retention of the actual supportive employment specialists. I've seen some agencies rotate through folks quite a bit, and then other agencies where it's taken a while to replace the positions, which also, impacts the ability for an organization to really implement IPS evidence-based practices. So it's an unfortunate issue that everybody, I think, across the nation is dealing with in terms of the ability to retain staff to do these really key services to really help people get out of poverty. It's very unfortunate.
Yeah, that's a United States wide sort of problem in health service agencies, I think.
Yeah.
Employment specialists in particular, but what I've heard too, just kind of in my neck of the woods, is a lot of the community-based staff, case managers, employment specialists, things like that, are finding that what I'll call non-traditional competitors for for talent are out there. So nobody get any ideas, but I read an article a couple months ago that Target nationwide is upping their minimum wage for their entry level positions to $24 an hour, which is it's wild. So these other places that we didn't have to compete for staff with, I think have upped their game as a result of the pandemic. And then for some of your licensed staff, I know for some of your licensed staff, one of the things that we have to really fight with now, Target, is if you've seen those telehealth companies that are they're recruiting licensed and intermediately licensed people to these positions to do virtual therapy, and I'm not even going to say what they're paying an hour, but it's literally unbelievable. And a lot of
Now we're
human
all
service.
curious, Paul.
Well, I don't want to. So here's how I know it. I know it because I'm a guy who's licensed, and they contacted me, and then a colleague of mine who's licensed, a different company contacted him, and the average of the 2 quotes we got was $85 an hour. And I'm telling you, again, I work at like a mental health center, and we can't compete with $85 an hour. That we just can't do it.
I think Donna and I were talking with some folks in Colorado, and they had seemed to kind of be able to elevate some of the wages too. So I think there are some states that have been able to do some of that. I don't know how that's really impacted, the rotation of staff through agencies, but definitely I know it's a focus, and we're always crossing our fingers for rate changes through, Medicaid, FCS, behavioral health, that really, puts the dollars into the direct staff to maintain program integrity and create some longevity. Because it's really hard when you run a program and you constantly have that staff churn. It's really hard.
Yeah, it is. And, this is an example in IPS where that'll impact your Fidelity score if you have that turnover. Really, really quickly, it'll impact your Fidelity score.
Absolutely. And I think both Darren and I have always encouraged agencies not to put all their eggs in one basket. So not to rely on just one pot of funding. Any supported employment agency that I worked for it's really been about 40 years that I've done supported employment. Typically they diversify funding. Maybe they're a DVR community rehab program, or maybe they have a DDA contract, or maybe they have different grants, or in addition to their primary pot of funding, if you will. So I've heard it called braided funding, and then all of a sudden the terminology was woven funding. It's like, good grief, it's just more than one pot of funding.
Well, it's about 4 minutes to the hour, and we usually break for lunch on these, right, Dawn and Darren? I want to make sure I'm
we
respecting people's time.
We do. Look, Giovanni has a question for you, Paul.
I didn't see that. Which one? I'm looking through the.
raised hand.
Oh, I was looking in the chat. Sorry about that. Thank you. Let me see if I can. Go ahead. If you want to go ahead and come off of mute, Giovanni, you're welcome to.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was just trying to process everything you were saying about the fact that, there's all this competition for people to make a little bit more money than they do now. And I think it's important. But what I've also seen is that I was the director of interim housing for a little while, overseeing some shelters, and my staff's pay went up to like $70,000 for a program manager underneath me, and it got closer and closer and closer to my income. So it's like, where do we kind of put a pause to this and just kind of think about the fact that we've never been in this. Most of us are not in this for the money, but we do need to survive, of course.
Right.
So there's just kind of it puts you kind of in a dilemma, my staff, they really do need to, get this pay bump, but then, it kind of raises everything else in the economy. And then now I need to ask for more money. And it's like, are we going to be able to provide the services, to our clients with, these asking salaries going up so much? I'm just perplexed by it. And I just wanted to add that I really don't know if I have a question per se, but I get really confused around this topic, because I know I expect more pay for more responsibility.
Sure.
And I've been in the business for 20 years. And so if I was a case manager, 25 would be okay. And I may pick up something extra on the side, or, maybe we're looking at some overtime opportunities or some bonuses or different things like that to kind of incentivize the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Good point.
Yep. And I think it does cause a lot of problems. I mean, our society has always sort of decided, I don't think maybe they didn't do it on purpose, but the people that take care of others typically don't get paid a lot unless they're like MDs or at some educational level. And you kind of put out there what Dawn mentioned, often the rates go many, many years without getting increased, even
Mm.
though people try to get them increased, pretty much year after year. So, and then you add to that some of these competitors now, the non-traditional competitors, are for-profit agencies that have way more money available to them than your average human service agency does at any given time. And it's just all this sort of perfect storm of issues. But the one thing I am encouraged by, and this isn't just me trying to be nice Pollyanna right before lunch, but for sure, like we still are attracting good people. We're not getting people that are applying to our positions, even if there are pay bumps. We're not getting people that are pulling up in their Porsche and wanting to game the system to get money. I think we're still attracting people that want to help others, which is good.
Mhm.
And I anytime we can pay them more, I think yes, we definitely should if we can swing it. But you're right. It's this real bind for human service agencies across America right now because they want to pay people more,
Mhm.
but they also don't want to, like you're saying, lose all their leadership who's maybe not getting paid anymore. Um, so how do you balance all of this noise with non-traditional competitors? And I don't know. This is such a weird time for human service agencies.
Yes, it is.
It's
Well,
weird.
Paul, you said Pollyanna, I don't think so. And here's why. As Darren and I do Fidelity reviews, and we've been on each other's teams and gotten to see some of the same agencies together. I've yet to see one agency in any Fidelity review that it just didn't come across as very clear that the staff cared about individuals, that they wanted to help people improve their quality of life. I can very honestly say in pretty much any report that I've written that comes across as very clear, that people care about the quality of life of the individuals that they're serving. So,
Yeah.
not Pollyanna at all. Thank God, it's a very real thing, and I'm thankful to be part of the process.
Yeah, and if like I said, if we can, let's pay people more, right? I mean, my goodness. But
Absolutely.
we drifted a little bit, but it was a good drift. It was a good drift.
I
Let's do
like-
this. Go ahead, Don. Go ahead.
I see Giovanni has a thumbs up there, so
Okay.
good one.
Yeah, for sure. Let's do this. Let's take a lunch break. And I don't remember Dawn and Darren or everybody else on the call. Basically, I think we can break for however long we want to break. So, do we usually do an hour?
We've been doing an hour. I mean, this is
Okay.
a lot of information and you tend to get brain dead. So
Yeah.
we want folks to actually have the ability to think when they come back. So an hour's good.
Okay, let's do an hour. And then I will see you all at 1 your time. And if you have questions that you're thinking of while you're on the line and connected, you're welcome to put them in the chat. And when we start, we can start with those.
Cool. Thank you.
Hey, Paul.
All right, everyone. Okay, a few more minutes, five or so minutes, I think, while people are shuffling back in from lunch.
I was just looking at the chat. Darren sent me one that he has to jump off to a meeting at 1, and I have to jump off at a meeting at 1:10.
Okay,
That were previously scheduled, so.
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I knew it would be.
Yeah.
You got it and then some.
Oh, aren't you kind?
No, just truthful.
Well, hopefully, everybody else won't jump off too.
Well, although you know what, when I think about it, I got to make you the host or everybody will jump off at one time.
Yeah.
Because I will hop out and it will go away.
And in the future, if you and Darren both have to leave, we can skip lunch and just go for another hour and then be done too, if it happens again.
Well, and that's a distinct possibility. I know that timeline wise, it's mid-afternoon for you, and I know it's lunchtime for the folks here. So we'd have to take a vote and see if anybody has blood sugar issues or whatever. But
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
always eat lunch while they're sitting. Okay, too. So
Yeah, I would never know if they
Yep.
didn't tell me.
that would be truth. So next time we'll check. I think next time the email that I sent, didn't we figure we'd do a 201 next time in March?
I think so.
Yeah. So that might be a slightly different situation and group anyway. Some of the folks that have been doing Fidelity reviews and are used to maybe we get a lunch on time and maybe we don't.
Yeah, or even a shorter one, whatever works. I'm flexible. So
Yeah. No, it's a good thought. And hopefully folks will tell us whether I said earlier today the 3 hours worth is enough to be semi brain dead when you get to lunchtime. So that's why I kind of promote lunch. But that's only based on what I end up needing.
sure.
Everybody else may do better than I do with, kind of that intense Zoom fatigue thing that potentially can go on.
It's a real thing.
It is a real thing. I was so surprised when we started doing all the virtual stuff because of the pandemic, just how exhausted I was. And I look today and I really have, without this lunch, I don't have another break. When do I have another break? Do I have another break? 5:30.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's that piece too.
Those are long days in a different way.
Yes, they are indeed. I'm impressed that our leadership has started encouraging folks to do meetings that start at 5 after and 5 till to have a little bit of transition time.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, because that sometimes is lacking too.
Yeah, I'm still kind of in a hybrid world where half of my meetings are virtual and half are in person, but nobody gives me drive time between the two of them. So
Yeah,
do a lot of hopping on my phone, while I'm
There
driving
we
to the
go.
next place.
which is okay, but it depends on what the traffic's like.
Yeah, really,
Uh,
really.
Well, and this meeting that I've got coming up starts at 1:10 because somebody has another meeting that they are exiting and they wanted some transition time, so I can be in for a handful of minutes and then I gotta go.
Yeah.
Have a good rest of the meeting.
Oh, Darren, I thought you'd scooted already.
I'm getting
always
ready
good to talk with you.
I'm
always good
running
to-
late on my scooch. But I wanted to say bye.
Oh, thanks. Have a good day.
You are next host, Paul, so
Okay.
you will be the one that ends the meeting for everybody when it's at that point.
Okay. Do I need to, did we record this or anything?
It's still
We-
recording. So we have an hour long of silence. At least folks heard us talking about the fact we were going to lunch, so maybe they'll fast forward through the hour, but if they watch the recording. But yeah, we've got an hour long.
Does
Fine.
it, do I need to do anything special once I end the meeting in order to maintain that recording, or does it automatically save or something?
It's still going. It's gonna say when you get to the end of the webinar, there's a button down the bottom right that should say end. That ends it for everybody.
Okay.
I am not sure, or Tony Tran the guy that
Mhm.
does all of our setting up of Zoom meetings, is
Yeah.
supposed to teach Darren and I where to find them once they are done. If it prompts you to download it, do you have any problem with downloading it and then sending it to us?
No, not at all. I'm happy to do that.
Because I think that's one of the things it might do. So yeah, if it says download and you're okay with that, download it and we'll figure
Yeah,
it out.
for sure. I can do that.
Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah. All right. Well, while I got you, I'll just go ahead and kind of get everything started. I didn't see anything new in the chat from break. Looks like VR is having similar staffing issues, and that's what I've heard from VR in a couple
Yeah.
different places in the US. I think everybody's having staffing issues, to be honest with you.
I do
heard an-
consultation with some folks in Maine and they were talking about their staffing problems too, so.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's everywhere.
Yep.
And in my Fidelity review, one of our reviewers was telling me, he's a pretty well-read guy, that I was just kind of saying, I don't know where all of the employees went. Where did everybody go?
Mhm,
And he was saying it's not there's not one not one thing that caused it.
mhm,
But like during the pandemic, he had read an article wherein a lot of people who were close to retirement but maybe not at retirement age opted to retire early. So we've lost a giant portion of the workforce who
mhm.
are in and around retirement age that just decided, forget it, I'll stay home and I'll just be safe.
Yeah, I
Um,
know a bunch of them as a matter of fact, so I hadn't
Yeah.
considered that. I
yeah,
was talking to somebody and they said, that just the sheer numbers of people that passed away from COVID
Yep.
make at least a slight impact.
Yeah.
And I hadn't considered that either, but those are two good reasons.
yeah. And I know just where I work as part of a hospital health system. Um, I know we have lost a lot of potential candidates because they have chosen to not go into healthcare.
Yeah,
The pandemic has either scared them or whatever, but they don't want to be. Like we said earlier, they can go to Target and work. Uh, you know,
absolutely.
yeah,
Amazon and get $1,000 sign-on bonus.
yeah,
grief.
yeah. I don't know. It's all very interesting right now. About every 5 years, I have this like thing in my head where I'm like, man, it's going to be a wild 3 to 5 years, but it keeps getting wild, more and more wild. So maybe it's my fault. I don't know. Stop
Nah,
asking.
I think there's a lot of us asking the same question, so it's
Yeah,
a group something.
yeah. I think you're right. Well, let me get my screen shared here. Okay, where we left off, everybody, was we were talking about the vocational assessment, um, and we are close. We're in good shape on time. Everything's going to be okay. Even if we don't get through everything I wanted to get through today, we've got Wednesday. I'm trying to set us up in a nice way for Wednesday too. And Wednesday is less of a review of content and hopefully more of a discussion about, how things go on a Fidelity review. But for the next item, it's rapid job search for a competitive job. This one's interesting. So we're going to look at the time between the date of the first assessment with the IPS team and the first face-to-face contact with an employer. And if you look at the Fidelity scale, you can see we're looking for an average of 30 days for a score of a 5. This one's interesting for a lot of reasons. One is when you get into an agency, sometimes agencies have all kinds of different ways that they describe the client's first appointment with the IPS team. But the manual makes it pretty simple. To start this calculation, you use the date of the client's first appointment with the IPS specialist. Some people use the date of the assessment. It says up